Iran. Markets, of course, don't like these contradictory statements. So what do you see happening?
Now, look, the markets are only going to respond to the political certainty of the most important leader at that time. And in this case, it's President Trump. So what President Trump has tried to do is try to calm markets, but this hasn't proved to be a reality because, number one, the situation on the ground hasn't been solved, and number two, markets believe what they see as opposed to believing rhetoric, right? So this conflict's economic impact will end, hopefully, before inflation becomes too runaway and before central banks around the world raise rates, which will incur, I think, a global recession. So what markets are hoping for is for Trump to actually follow through with his claims of peace and bring oil supply back online so that the world can rest easier than before that.
Right. The thing is that that only takes into account one side in this negotiation. That's the American side. The Iranians have to agree to that as well, don't they?
Well, we have three sides to this, Anand. We have the Americans, we have the Israelis, and we have the Iranians, and also we have sort of the coalition of the willing peaceful who don't want to get involved if they don't have to, right? So the Israelis are on a path where they want to see a destabilized Iran, an Iran that doesn't present an existential threat to Israel, right? So behind closed doors, guaranteed, Netanyahu and Trump are having fierce conversation and debates as to how to approach the situation. And U.S. intelligence isn't showing all of its cards to the Iranians, to the Israelis, because they want to see a denigrated Iran, and markets are of tertiary importance to them. And the Iranians naturally, if you look at it from the Iranian side, they're thinking to themselves, we haven't started anything that required a physical sort of bombardment of our territory. So they have got the Strait of Hormuz as the choke point and as the sort of the sword to the heads of all the world. And the Iranians want to find, I think, a peace, but a peace that makes sense to them, because no matter what you say, war is expensive for all parties, given enough time.
Well, let's look at the situation right now, and we look at the details and how this war is affecting regional economies. According to the United Nations Development Programme, the Persian Gulf region has lost up to a year of economic growth because of the war. The director of the UNDP's Regional Bureau estimates $194 billion has been lost in the first month of this war. So what is your assessment of the damage that's already been done?
Well, it's almost ironic, Anand, because the Gulf nations predominantly rely on oil as a form of growth, as a form of filling government coffers. Although oil prices are where they are, they can't take advantage of that because they can't physically get their oil to market for them to reap the benefits. So they have high oil prices without the ability to capitalize off of that. And the other growth driver of their economy, especially in the UAE and Dubai, is the actual real economy, which has seen a degradation since this war came to pass. So if you look at it through a long-term lens, each of these Gulf countries' vision plans are now going to be compromised, and they're going to see a shortfall in funding for them to actually transition away from oil into a more diversified economy. So the actual income from oil cannot now be used to fund the future because that income is no longer present, and all plans for them to develop this over the long term has been compromised. So for sure, the immediate impact has been the physical destruction, lives lost. Secondary impact is a change in perception perhaps of the Gulf region as being a place to invest. And thirdly, when it comes to long-term nation building and diversification, this has taken a hit also. So the GCC countries are primarily wanting to see this war come to an end as fast as possible.
And if we look at Britain, the International Monetary Fund warns that Britain's economy is especially vulnerable to spiraling prices because of its reliance on gas. A report in The Guardian says households in Britain could see their energy bill increase by almost $400 to around $2,650. That's $2,650. How does Britain fix this?
Britain is in a position where they can't control the situation on the ground. And their attempt to actually try to do this is what Keir Starmer is doing with this, again, this more globalized coalition that he wants to have some sort of not direct military involvement in, perhaps a more stern diplomatic / trade angle to this, where they can try to find a way to open up the Strait of Hormuz. What's really surprising to me is that the Americans and the Brits aren't working that closely, at least visually together, on this conflict, given the amount of impact that this war has had and is continuing to have on the British economy. Couple this also, Adnan, with the fact that British growth over the last 20 years has been lackluster, especially given after '08, and their plans of growth is really taxation to growth, which isn't a growth policy which works in any case. But having high energy costs and high inflationary pressures, that leading to an increase in rates is only going to make life more expensive for the Brits and for myself here living here also. So this is something that the people don't want, businesses don't want, and the government don't want either. But trying to find a solution forward is going to be very difficult, given how separated they are in terms of a unified path forward with Trump in this attempt to find peace.
You know, this month-long closure of the Strait of Hormuz, it's drawn many comparisons with the oil crisis in the 1970s. From 1973 to 1975, both the US and the United Kingdom ended up gripped in a recession. But could this be worse?
Well, this is, I think, different to that, because what happened then was the OPEC, or at least the Saudis, responding to Yom Kippur. Yeah. Right, and the conflict there. So they restricted supply, and they could have easily given that supply back if their demands were met. And the Americans came in and said, we guarantee your safety if you provide us supply of oil. Right? So we are in a slightly different situation only because America now is a net exporter of energy. And they can insulate their economies more so than any other country in the world. But each conflict is the same in its impact, meaning lives lost, inflation abound. Measures to control inflation in a different macroeconomic environment that we find ourselves in is going to hit harder than I think before, right? High debt levels of countries are only going to go higher, especially if they have to subsidize living standards for their people. So we're in a different position because things have become more expensive in general, across the board, and there's more reliance internationally on trade and on energy as a fundamental input of cost to the rest of the economy, which isn't good, especially if you're facing restricted supply and a war coupled with that.
Klisman Murati, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
Israel's Hayom daily newspaper reports